Similarly, there are periods and stages in the life of the aggregate world of humanity, which at one time was passing through its degree of childhood, at another its time of youth, but now has entered its long presaged passage of maturity, the evidences of which are everywhere visible and apparent. Therefore, the requirements and conditions of former periods have changed and merged into exigencies which distinctly characterize the present age of the world of mankind. That which was applicable to human needs during the early history of the race could neither meet nor satisfy the demands of this day and period of newness and consummation. Humanity has emerged from its former degrees of limitation and preliminary training. Man must now become imbued with new virtues and powers, new moralities, new capacities. New bounties, bestowals, and perfections are awaiting and already descending upon him. The gifts and graces of the period of youth, although timely and sufficient during the adolescence of the world of mankind, are now incapable of meeting the requirements of its maturity. The playthings of childhood and infancy no longer satisfy or interest the adult mind. Abdu'l-Baha.
Thank you so much. So now I'll introduce our speaker for today, and just a reminder to save all your questions until after the talk when we'll have our Q&A session. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I will put in the chat. So our speaker this week is Mr. Peter Terry, and his topic is Baha'u'lláh on the Signs of the Coming of Age of Humanity. Mr. Peter Terry, freelance scholar, is the author of many monographs on topics in the field of religious studies, history, pedagogy, and Western classical music. His writings include Proofs of Baha'u'llah, Proofs of the Prophets, and Truth Triumphs, a Bahá'í Response to Misrepresentations of the Bahá'í Teachings in Bahá'í History. Peter Terry has a BA from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, began a Ph.D. in Islamic Studies at the University of Chicago, and completed an MM in Vocal Technique and Repertoire at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. And with that, I'll hand it off to Mr. Terry.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, Bayan. And I know your sister is somewhere in there too. Thank you for putting on the music and for reading that passage. You are sisters, right? You are siblings, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so I some of you know me because I could tell by your faces and by your names, and some of you have probably never heard of me or certainly heard me speak. And I've been very privileged to be invited back a few times already by the Baha'i family, and you're a wonderful audience, and it's there are always new people that I'm going to be meeting on these gatherings. So a little bit about if there just happens to be even one person there who is not acquainted with the faith of Baha'u'llah, we want to make sure that they get a proper introduction before we get started. Because unlike Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, and Krishna, Baha'u'llah is not universally recognized in the world. There's still lots of people who don't really know anything about Baha'u'llah, except that he has this name that seems kind of strange to most of us. But Baha'u'llah appeared in the 19th century in Iran, born in 1817, and he passed on to the next world in 1892. So he lived really the entirety of his life in the 19th century, and he had an extraordinary life and wrote a great deal of literature, sacred literature on mostly on spiritual topics, but also solving basically all the practical problems that human beings find so difficult to sort out for themselves. And so we're going to be spending the next thousands and thousands of years learning about his ideas and applying them and finding that they work very well indeed. And I say thousands of years because he wrote a great deal, and most of it is still untranslated. And even that portion which is translated requires a great deal of meditation and thought and in order to tease out the meanings, because there are many, many layers in Baha'u'llah's writings. So that would be your short introduction. If you don't know about Baha'u'llah, and I recommend that you keep coming back to these sessions and keep learning about it. So today, the topic that I chose was based upon some research that I was doing that I started many years ago and then came back to over and over time. I came across a quotation. It's the next to last passage from the Kitab-i-Aqdas. And it was a very, very interesting quotation for me because it was saying something that I didn't understand. Most of the time, I feel as if I had some sort of an understanding of what Baha'u'llah is talking about, but I had no clue, literally no clue. What is he talking about here? So that rather than giving up, I persisted. And so I want to tell you a little bit about this story and how it ended up or how it is now, okay? So the first thing I need to do is find my paper so that I can actually read what I've come up with. And so what I've called this the signs of the coming of age of humanity. And why? Because that is how Baha'u'llah explains this topic in this passage from the Kitab-i-Aqdas. So in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, if you're not familiar with it, this is the book of Baha'u'llah's laws, but it's also much more than that. It's a book of fundamental principles of the faith of Baha'u'llah. And many of them are going to be subject to a great deal of commentary over the years in order to understand how they're going to apply. So what you have in paragraph 189 of the Kitab-i-Aqdas, which is, as I said, the penultimate, the next to last paragraph of the Kitab-i-Aqdas, it says, "O members of parliaments throughout the world, select ye a single language for the use of all on earth, and adopt ye likewise a common script. God verily maketh plain for you that which shall profit you, and enable you to be independent of others. He of a truth is the most bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-informed. This will be the cause of unity, could ye but comprehend it, and the greatest instrument for promoting harmony and civilization, would that ye might understand. We have appointed two signs for the coming of age of the human race. The first, which is the most firm foundation, we have set down in other of our tablets, while the second hath been revealed in this wondrous book." So that begins the topic. So I read this and I thought, really? So this is the only place that I'd ever read that there were signs for the coming of age of the human race. I mean, there were prophecies, certainly, that we'd seen. The other prophets had talked about the coming of promised one who was going to usher in world peace and world unity. But as far as signs of the maturity of humanity, I'd never really seen that before. So I was very curious, and then that's the beginning of the curiosity. Then he says, one of these signs is the selection of a single language for use of all on earth in a common script. And in at least its first stage of realization, we're experiencing that right now. There are more people who actually understand English and can use English than any other language in the world. And even though for most of those people who are using it, it's a second or third language, nevertheless, it's the language that they use in order to communicate with people who are of different nationalities. When we have international gatherings of any kind, whether it's political, cultural, academic, or of any other sort, almost 100% of the time, the language being used is English. And so, in a sense, we're very much on the road to adopting that sign of the coming of age of humanity. And it is bringing about the unity of humanity because we can communicate with each other, something that a century or even in many cases, just a lifetime ago, people couldn't. They simply had no way of doing it. Only those people who had a certain kind of education knew this other language apart from their native language. And as we know, there are still many, many people in the world who don't know English and don't know any other language that enables them to share their ideas and understand the ideas of other people. So this is one of the signs. And I think we can come to a general recognition that this sign is in the process of being realized in the world. And that process is bearing fruit. However, what did Baha'u'llah actually say here? He said, we have appointed 2 signs for the coming of age of the human race. The first, which is the most firm foundation, we have set down in other of our tablets. Okay, well, the second, we've encountered the second here. That's the single language. There's a common language. But the first one, what is that? The first one, as he explains, and we're looking at the sources for this. This first one is called divine philosophy, and it includes alchemy. Now, first I want to read to you the note that was appended to this passage in the Bahá'u'lláh by the research department. So it was published along with it to explain what it means. And so I'm reading that quote, which is note 194. It says, the first sign of the coming of age of humanity referred to in the writings of Baha'u'llah is the emergence of a science which is described as that divine philosophy, which will include the discovery of a radical approach to the transmutation of elements. This is an indication of the splendors of the future stupendous expansion of knowledge. Now I want to read to you a definition of divine philosophy, an explanation of its origination by Baha'u'llah himself. And this is from the Hikmat. This is from the Tablet of Wisdom, which is one of the tablets that's in the collection of the tablets of Baha'u'llah published, or written rather, after the Bahá'u'lláh. They were all written in the 1870s, 80s, and basically in that time frame. And for those of you who are maybe not familiar with this is a collection of tablets which was translated quite a while back and is available online, and it's simply called the Tablets of Baha'u'llah. And if you click on Tablets of Baha'u'llah, then you can find the Tablet of Wisdom, which is also called Hikmat in the Arabic. So I'm going to read his definition, his description of what this field of divine philosophy is. He says, although it is recognized that the contemporary men of learning are highly qualified in philosophy, arts, and crafts, yet were anyone to observe with a discriminating eye, he would readily comprehend that most of this knowledge hath been acquired from the sages of the past. For it is they who have laid the foundation of philosophy, reared its structure, and reinforced its pillars. Thus doth thy Lord, the Ancient of Days, inform thee. The sages aforetime acquired their knowledge from the prophets, inasmuch as the latter were the exponents of divine philosophy and the revealers of heavenly mysteries. Men quaffed the crystal living waters of their utterance, while others satisfied themselves with the dregs. Everyone receiveth a portion according to his measure. Verily, he is the equitable, the wise. One more paragraph, because it gives you a citation of a couple of the very earliest philosophers, both of whom were Greek. It says, Empedocles, who distinguished himself in philosophy, was a contemporary of David, while Pythagoras lived in the days of Solomon, son of David, and acquired wisdom from the treasury of prophethood. And the last sentence that I'm going to read from this passage summarizes Baha'u'llah's definition. The essence and fundamentals of philosophy have emanated from the prophets. Then there is another definition of divine philosophy, which we find among the talks of Abdu'l-Baha. This particular talk is found in a compilation of talks called the Promulgation of Universal Peace. It is a talk number 105, and it's dated the 20th of September, 1912. Once I get this nicely formatted and so forth, I'll be sharing this document so that it can also be looked upon by any of you for further study. So I'm just going to read the very beginning of this definition of divine philosophy, which basically takes off where Baha'u'llah left off. Philosophy is of two kinds, natural and divine. Natural philosophy seeks knowledge of physical verities and explains material phenomena, whereas divine philosophy deals with ideal verities and phenomena of the spirit. The field and scope of natural philosophy have been greatly enlarged, and its accomplishments are most praiseworthy, for it has served humanity. But according to the evidence of the present world conditions, divine philosophy, which has for its object the sublimation of human nature, spiritual advancement, heavenly guidance for the development of the human race, attainment to the breadths of the Holy Spirit, and knowledge of the verities of God, has been outdistanced and neglected. So then he goes on in that talk in quite some detail. I highly recommend that you read the whole passage. So I'm going to come back to this sign later on, but I want to go through the other signs because they were very helpfully pointed out in this note 194 appended to the translation of the Kitab-i-Aqdas, so that we have an overview of all of the signs that Baha'u'llah specifically identified. So, as I said, the first sign is divine philosophy. The second sign is the adoption of a universal language and script. We've already talked about that. And the quotations about that second sign are to be found in actually were described by Shoghi Effendi, and so we have them not just mentioned in this footnote, this note to the Kitab-i-Aqdas, but it's actually cited from a tablet of Baha'u'llah by Shoghi Effendi. And Shoghi Effendi says, to quote him exactly, in his most holy book, Baha'u'llah has enjoined the selection of a single language and the adoption of a common script for all on earth to use, an injunction which, when carried out, would, as he himself affirms in that book, be one of the signs of the coming of age of the human race. The third sign also noted in 194 that same note to the Kitabi Aqdas. The third sign is that no one will accept to bear the burden of kingship. Nobody will be willing to accept the weight of kingship. And these are words that are actually penned by Baha'u'llah. The full citation I quote to you from The Promised Day Has Come, where Shoghi Effendi translated it. He says, he says, this is stated in his tablet addressed to Sheikh Salman. One of the signs of the maturity of the world is that no one will accept to bear the weight of kingship. Kingship will remain with none willing to bear alone its weight. That day will be the day whereon wisdom will be manifested among mankind. Only in order to proclaim the cause of God and spread abroad his faith will anyone be willing to bear this grievous weight. Well is it with him who, for the love of God and his cause, and for the sake of God and the purpose of proclaiming his faith, will expose himself unto this great danger and will accept this toil and trouble. I think this is a wonderfully evocative description, because most of us do not regard kingship as troublesome. You think, oh, it's wonderful. You have all this money and you have palaces and you get to wear fancy clothes and listen to concerts, and boy, it sounds like the perfect life. And all of our girls want to be princesses, and all of our boys want to be princes. It's like we're all in love with the idea, the myth, let's say, the fantasy of monarchy, but we have no idea how hard a job it is. We have no idea how constricting it is for a person's life, and how the weight that it represents. And I've become, for some reason, like millions of other people, I follow what's going on with the royal family of England, and I'm starting to get an inkling. It's not much fun being a royal. It's really hard work. And people have these really outrageous expectations that you're going to be superhuman. So I'm coming to a personal understanding of why it is that kingship will remain, will become something that people avoid at all costs. And we might even consider understanding the reason why the guardianship lasted only through Shoghi Effendi. If we consider it in that light, it may be that the male descendants of Baha'u'llah were just plain terrified of the idea of becoming guardians. They could see that being a guardian of the Baha'i faith was not going to be a walk in the park. It was going to be the toughest job in the world. Why would you want to do that? So if you can avoid doing that, you will. So this is the third sign that Baha'u'llah has designated. The fourth sign is described in a passage which has not yet been published in English in any of the Baha'i materials that we have. However, I have a translation from the World Center. It's from a collection of tablets called Asrarul Athar. It was collected by Fazl Mazandarani, who was a great Baha'i scholar of Iran in the past century, in the 19th century, and who also made a tour of the United States in the 1920s and gave talks all over the United States. And this passage that is translated from that collection, as for the signs of the coming of age of the human race mentioned in the Kitabi Aqdas, one sign is the advent of universal peace, and the other is the unfoldment and appearance of the sister of prophecy, the divine philosophy of which the hidden craft forms a part. The hidden craft is a term used in Arabic and Persian for alchemy. And in this, it's called the Sister of Prophecy, which obviously a very close family relationship to prophetic. And therefore, we come to see again how important this field of divine philosophy is. But I cite this passage because he says something different from what the previous ones did. And he's saying one of the signs is the advent of universal peace. So we now have another one. We have a universal language, we have universal peace, and we have this divine philosophy. So now we're going to find that there's actually another one. And this one was mentioned in the note 194. And I quote the text. The coming of age of the human race has been associated by Shoghi Effendi with the unification of the whole of mankind, the establishment of a world commonwealth, and an unprecedented stimulus to the intellectual, the moral, and spiritual life of the entire human race. Now, this is excerpt, the last passage there, the last words were taken from a much longer passage, which I bring to your attention. It's found in one of the letters that are published in the World Order of Baha'u'llah. If you've read the World Order of Baha'u'llah, you know it's a series of letters that Shoghi Effendi wrote, most of them addressed to the American Baha'i community. And one of those is called The Unfoldment of World Civilization. And that has a very detailed description of what is coming, what we can expect to happen in the future, and how this is God's will, and this has been prophesied, and that it is going to happen. It's not a question. We don't know exactly when these various phenomena will take place, but they will occur. So, for those of us who are paying attention to what's going on in the world and who have some knowledge of the Baha'i writings, the second, third, fourth, and fifth signs of the coming of age of humanity are pretty familiar. They're talked about and they're written about by Baha'is. We think we have some pretty good understanding what those things are, and they even are found in our pamphlets, and they're found in our firesides. There's things that we live with as Baha'is on a daily basis. But the first sign, the most sure foundation, is something that most Baha'is are very curious about, because they don't know where to go to find information. So I want to describe a correspondence I had with a fellow scholar on this question, because I wasn't making much headway. So I'll tell you what the process that I went about to try to find out more about divine philosophy. Well, first of all, I first became interested in divine philosophy when I was reading the talks of Abdu'l-Baha, principally in the promulgation of universal peace, and I kept finding references to it, the term divine philosophy, over and over and over again. And it was always, it was certain kinds of talks that Abdu'l-Baha was giving that he was relating to divine philosophy. And then when I read the Law-i-Hikmat, the Tablet of Wisdom, I discovered that Baha'u'llah talked about divine philosophy, which is not found in any of his other tablets. So I was really very interested when I discovered this. But for me, it opened more questions than answered questions. That's what happened. I just felt like I want to know more, and I'm not getting at things. And how did this come to be the first and the most firm foundation as a sign of the coming of age of the human race? So I wrote to the research department at the Baha'i World Center and asked them this question: what does this mean? Where does this come from? And they wrote me back a letter, the research department, and recommended that I go and look in two sources. One was called Amr Vahal, Volume 3. The other one was Ma'ideh I Asamani. Both of them are collections of Persian texts, and they even very nicely gave me page numbers, volume numbers and page numbers, so I could find these passages for myself. However, this was before AI, my friends. It was before ChatGPT, and my Persian is just not very good. I mean, it's very elementary, and it takes, I have to pull out my dictionary and I have to look up each word. And so I thought, well, this is not going to work for me. I'm just going to have to wait until I find somebody who actually can read the Persian and understand what it's saying. But since I was not in contact with people that I could ask to do that for me, and my Baha'i friends who could read Persian were interested in other topics and not particularly in this one, I wrote a second time to the research department, and this time they sent me an Arabic quotation, and they told me where to find it. And that Arabic quotation with the English translation was very interesting. But then, of course, you know, what did it do? It begged more questions. So I started looking further and further. And there's a website that some of you might know of. It's called Hurkalia. And it's located at the University of California at Merced. And in residence there is a scholar named Stephen Lambden. He's done a great deal of research on the writings, and including the writings about alchemy and the writings about divine philosophy. So I thought I'd go there and do some research, but I didn't find the text that I was looking for. And so I went back to a friend of mine who had written on the subject, and I asked him point blank, where does this come from? Can you point me in the right direction? And he did. He did. He translated the passage from Ma'ideh Asmani, Volume 1, and I'm going to read that to you, because this answered a lot of my questions. So here's the translation. This is a provisional translation, not an authorized one from the World Center. In these days, the wise ones of the earth have repudiated this heavenly secret, this divine wisdom. Divine wisdom is a translation of the words hikmat ilahiyat, which means divine philosophy also. And amongst themselves have proved beyond doubt that such a thing is impossible. Were we to mention the proofs and arguments of these people, our discourse would become protracted. Be that as it may, the reason for their rejection is the protecting hand of him who is the unconstrained, which has kept this secret safe from treacherous eyes and thieving hands. However, it will not be long before some acknowledge its existence and testify to its truth. The appearance of this hidden treasure among them is the sign of the coming of the age of the world. After its attainment, a great peril and a desolating affliction are in store for the world and its peoples, unless they all enter within the divine paradise. This was reiterated, of course, in that very short passage that I cited before from Asrarul Athar. But the longer one is, of course, gives much more of a description. So, because Baha'u'llah in the Dawai Hikmat has said that the origins of divine philosophy are in the prophets, and that the sages of the past have studied this divine philosophy and written about it, and that most of what is known today about it is derived from these earlier sages. Of course, what I wanted to do is find out, where can I learn more about divine philosophy? Who's studied it? Who's written about it? Who knows about it? Well, it turns out that there are materials available. Most of them, the best ones, are in Arabic and Persian, but those are going to get translated. One of the sources that's Baha'i is this collection, Amra Vahak, which means cause and creation. It's basically about everything except God, because as we know as Baha'is, God is unknowable. So the only way we know God is through the way he has manifested himself and the way he has created his creation. So we know it through the book of Revelation and the book of creation. That's what we know about God. So that was the name of Fazl Mazandarani's collection, Amr Vahak. This has not been translated into English. A Baha'i scholar has translated the contents. Isn't that nice of him? He translated the whole contents of the book, and that is available online. It's actually on Baha'i Library. But for people like me, you're just you're making it more. I have to know more than just the contents. I need to know, what does it really say? And most of the passages that are quoted in that compilation are not translated into English. So another person who wrote about it was a Baha'i who served in the National Spiritual Assembly of Iran, much more recently, and his name was Dr. Ali Murad Dawoodi. And some of you may recognize his name, some of you might even know him. A great scholar, a great writer, a great philosopher, a professor of philosophy in Iran, member of the National Spiritual Assembly, who was kidnapped by the security forces and disappeared and has never been found again. So he's assumed to have been killed. And Dr. Dawoodi wrote quite extensively about the themes of divine philosophy, in Persian, of course. But there is a short essay of his, which was published in English in the Journal of Baha'i Studies on the 30th of April, 2020, which is available online. It's called God's Sanctity and Transcendence, and it's translated by Varka Bolodo Taifi. But I also have a friend who's told me that he's in the process of translating Dr. Dawoodi's longest and most comprehensive book on the subject. So there is Baha'i material. Most of it is in Persian, but hopefully very soon we'll have access to those writings. But because this goes back a long, long way, because the sages that Baha'u'llah talks about in Law Hikmat include Greek philosophers who lived 500, 600, 700 BC. This is a very old tradition, and there's a great deal of material out there. It just has to be mined. It has to be discovered. So one of the sources that is that's subsequent to the Greeks, the Greek material can be found quite easily and studied without any problem. But one of the sources that came into existence later on, it was particularly important in Iran, was an individual whose name was Shihab al-Din Yahya ibn Habash Suhrawardi, who's usually called Suhrawardi because it's easier, right? And he's also called Sheikh al-Ishraq. the master of illumination. And Sheikh Sohrawardi lived from 1155 to 1191. And he was assassinated. He was executed for heresy because he had some unconventional ideas. And as you know, there's a long history of this, is that people who have new ideas usually get, eliminated sooner or later, and he was. So he wrote very copiously, a great deal, and there's a terrific write-up on him in Wikipedia, by the way. So just get the spelling of his name right, or maybe Google will even help you with that. But basically, you want to look up Suhrawardi. That's Suhrawardi, but it's also has other spellings. So we have these books of his in Arabic and also in Persian. He wrote also in Persian. And many of the ideas on divine philosophy that we'll find in the Baha'i writings, that we'll find, for example, in those writings that were translated by The Guardian and included in Gleanings, but in many of Baha'u'llah's tablets and Abdul Baha as well, we're going to find a lot of concepts that are described by Suhrawardi very clearly and relating them to Islamic theology and Islamic scripture. And that includes the whole concept, the whole idea of glory, which is such an emblematic characteristic of Baha'u'llah's theology, of Baha in Arab. So I'm not, of course not, I can't possibly read you even passages from Suhrawardi without getting us way off base here. But I can give you this, not only can I point you in the direction of the Wikipedia article, but also there are some scholars who have worked on translating Suhrawardi's ideas into English in an intelligible way. And so this didn't mean just translating particular pieces, but actually studying the whole of his writings so that the ideas would come across accurately. And these scholars are, I'm going to give you their names. And the first one and the most important is a man whose name was Henry Corbin, who died in 1978. And he was regarded as one of the most eminent professors of Islamic philosophy and theology of his time. And he wrote a great deal about Suhrawardi and about divine philosophy. And he wrote principally in French, but most of his major works have been translated now into English. And I will be giving you a bibliography so that you can look up books both in French and in English. But, not everybody reads French, but most of you read English just fine. Another person is named John Walbridge. And John Walbridge has done a great deal of work in Baha'i studies. He worked on the Baha'i Encyclopedia for many years, and he wrote he wrote lots and lots of articles about different topics. His background was having studied Islamic studies in university, and he's very highly regarded by all of the Baha'i scholars who are in this field. And then at a certain point, he turned most of his attention to studying Suhrawardi, and he translated some of Suhrawardi's works, along with another scholar who will be mentioned in a minute. Another person who has worked a lot on this subject and is a man named Hossein Ziai. And a third one who is really very well known in the United States because he's been a professor in Georgetown University. Islamic Studies. His name is Syed Hossein Nasr, very well known in the States, as particularly in academics. And then there are two other ones. There's Yazdi Ha'iri and Mehdi Amin Razavi. And they have written in English quite considerably about Suhrawardi and about his philosophy. So it seems to me, because this is a field, because this particular sign of the maturity of humankind is listed first by Baha'u'llah, and he says it's the first and foremost. I think it's something that we ought to be looking into. And I think that it would be really wise of us to go and read what the sages of the past have written about it, and not think that the only source would be in the Baha'i writings, because that wouldn't be the case. The Baha'i writings do something absolutely essential, though. They separate the ideas of this original divine philosophy, which were derived originally from the manifestations of God over the course of millennia. They separate them from the ideas that have been adopted by us mere human beings, and we've tended to mix those in together. And as you know, if you've studied religion at all, you know that a religion in its current manifestation is not the religion of the book. It's how the book's been interpreted, how it's been put into practice by its followers. And sometimes the followers go way off in left field and completely misrepresent the teachings of the manifestation. But they don't usually know that. Most of the followers don't know that, because they've been doing it that way for so long that it's just become a habit. It's just become the norm. And if you were to say to them, did you know that Jesus said such and such? They would be astonished, because nobody ever told them that Jesus said that. They just told them, what we believe is this. And then, so because you're coming to my church, you're going to believe in this. And the same thing happened, of course, in Islam, exactly. And most of my Persian Baha'i friends have a very deep-seated disgust for the mullahs. And I understand that, because most of us Americans from a Christian background have the same sort of feeling about our priests and our ministers. They have misled us. They have, and they continue to mislead us. They continue to substitute their ideas for what's actually in the writings, right? And so one of the things that's really a wonderful exercise for Baha'is is to be able to go and investigate this divine philosophy and discover what it really means. And it is one of the links that brings together science and religion, because it comes from the prophets, but it's elaborated by human beings. It's based upon seminal concepts that are found in the writings of all the manifestations. And this is why it's a science, is because it's an objective phenomenon. Adib Masumian recently posted to one of the Facebook groups on the faith a translation of a very brief statement by Baha'u'llah, in which he says that the manifestations of God are in agreement about everything. There are no contradictions between them. Well, Baha'u'llah says that in a million places in his writings. But when you come across that statement and it's that succinct, that directed, that precise, it definitely does sort of wake you up. And it makes you say, well, the rest of the world is obsessed with the differences between people. and the differences between religions and the differences between sacred texts. And they're convinced that the differences have made us incompatible with each other. We can't possibly understand or get along with each other. The challenge of Baha'u'llah is that no, he says, no, that's not true. He says the essential truths are objective. They have been upheld by all of the manifestations, and the proof of the pudding is in the eating. In other words, you put them into practice and they work. And so the challenge for us really is to do something the Guardian recommended, and he said actually it was a Baha'i principle. He said the Baha'i faith is scientific in method. Well, that's independent investigation of reality. That's finding things out for yourself so that you can be really sure they're true, rather than depending on your parents or your teachers or your boss or your preacher or your minister or your mullah to tell you what to think and why you should think that way. It's really, this is probably the origin of all of the revolutions that have happened in the past 200 years, including the one that enables us to be sitting face to face with each other and talking and considering ideas in full freedom. Nobody's stopping us from doing this. Well, the origin of all of these revolutions has been to get us to think for ourselves and then take ownership for our own lives. That's still a very radical idea, because there are so many people in the world who do not have that privilege, do not have that right. And as we know, the world is a very perilous place to live in, because there are still so many people who don't have that right and who would like to take it away from us. So, my friends, I've mostly talked about one sign of the coming of age of humanity, but the main reason I did that is because the other four are things we're familiar with, things we recognize, things we've talked about on, with our Baha'i friends and with seekers. They're sort of part of the general menu that we know as Baha'is. And the new part of that menu for perhaps many of you will be this divine philosophy. And I can certainly provide you with some materials to discover for yourself. And I have to tell you, the discovering for yourself is really where it's at. Divine philosophy is such a short source of joy and of reaffirmation of your spiritual life when you find it for yourself, when you open the book and you find, oh, so that's what he means. So I would never take that away from anybody by trying to over-explain what divine philosophy is. Find out for yourself. And I can give you some tools to do some digging. But you will find that there are, as Baha'u'llah said in that passage, there are treasuries of gems to be found. And those riches, when I was a little boy, I loved the story of Ali Baba and how he would say this formula and the cave would open and there would be all these riches, all of these gems and coins and everything. Well, this is very much like that. Divine philosophy is like opening a door into treasury of gems of truth. I have a bad cough, and with that, I'm going to stop talking for a minute and listen to your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Terry. That was very, very in-depth research that I've always wondered about this topic as well. And I'm really glad that you came here today and told us all about it. So thank you again. So we have time for questions now. So if anybody has a question, they can put it in the chat and I will read it out. So one question is, can one critique a theological philosophy without questioning its divine origin?
That's an interesting one. Well, all right. So one of the things that we're going to learn from divine philosophy is that divine philosophy has certain fundamental principles. One of those fundamental principles is the word of God has unlimited meanings. Why do we know that? Because the manifestations have told us told it to us over and over again. So unlimited meanings means what? Well, first of all, the manifestations don't tell us all those unlimited meanings, do they? Usually, they'll tell us one, maybe two. Then comes along, Baha'u'llah appoints Abdu'l-Baha, and he says, it's your job now. Okay, so Abdu'l-Baha does the same thing. He gives one or two interpretations. And you know what Shoghi Effendi did? He had full authority to interpret anything in the writings. And he said, go home and read the book. That's what he said. Go read it. Think about it. And then you go back and you see Abdu'l-Baha said the same thing. The Baha'is, all the time, they'd be writing him letters and saying, what does this mean? What does that mean? Go reflect upon it. Meditate on it. Baha'u'llah says it in the Kitabi Igan. He quotes a hadith, and it says, 1 hour of reflection is superior to 70 years of pious worship. All right, now 70 years. I'm 71 years old. So if I started praying when I was 1 year old, and I'm praying, regularly, deeply, devotedly for 70 years, 1 hour of actually thinking about something was superior to all of those prayers. That's radical thinking, because it's saying the capacity of the human being to understand is much greater than we think. But we have to practice it. We have to practice it. And practice needs to happen regularly. Because like anything else we do in this world, if you don't do it regularly, you get rusty and you forget. And so we don't have to worry about, I would suggest, I'm going to say this from my personal experience, you don't have to worry if all kinds of crazy ideas pop into your head when you're trying to figure out something. Just don't get attached to the crazy ideas, because some of the crazy ideas might actually be true, and others might be just crazy ideas, And really essential is we have to be humble. When we're humble and we understand, I'm not the guardian. I'm not the master, and I'm certainly not the manifestation of God. So, I have to defer to them because they know more than I do. So if I come up with an idea that syncs, that is in harmony with what's already revealed, then I might be onto something. I probably am onto something, because he wants us to have confidence in our own capacity to understand. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. If you look through what the Guardian wrote about how we go about the process of making decisions in an assembly. And this is the same process, whether it's a local spiritual assembly, national spiritual assembly, or the Universal House of Justice. What is the process? The process is consultation between individuals, and then they take a vote. How do they take the vote? What are they told to do? Follow your conscience. Okay? Follow your conscience. Okay? Well, if you're supposed to follow your conscience, then you've got to have confidence in your conscience. You've got to have confidence that when you're reading the hidden words and you come to an insight, don't automatically dismiss it and say, oh, it's just my nutty idea. Maybe it isn't, right? It could be that you've landed on one of the gems that's now been revealed to you personally. Now you get it. But on the other hand, always be in a state of search. Because when we're in a process of search, we don't get attached to what we see, how we understand things today. Because something could happen and tomorrow we see them differently. And that's not, this is not inconsistency. It's not, we should not be embarrassed that we change our minds, that we perceive things differently. This has nothing to do, when Baha'u'llah talks about certitude, he talks about the state of mind that we can come to when we are really, really focused on spiritual things. And the doors open up for us, and then we see things with a new eye and with a new ear, and hear with a new ear. And this is an experience that everybody can have, because it's what he's describing is a spiritual process of growth. And if we're not involved in a spiritual process of growth in this world, what makes us think we're going to be starting the next world off with, in a good place? The whole purpose of doing it here is to practice it so that we're really good at it by the time we go to the next world. My mother just went to the next world 3 days ago, and she's been really practicing a lot her whole life. And I have such complete confidence that she is soaring with the angels right now, because she did it. She walked the talk. So don't worry if you've got ideas that are, well, for one thing, remember that your ideas are your ideas. And if you find that the people around you are not particularly receptive to your ideas, then don't talk about them. Or find some other people who would love to hear about new ideas. There are lots of us out there. So I'm one. Come talk to me.
Thank you. Another question is, in the Kitab al-Aqdas, there are many punishments and punishments given in the weight of gold. And for the divine philosophy in the future, when there's transmutation of elements, how will this affect the price of gold in relation to the writings?
All right. I'm a little confused here. First of all, you start out with punishments in the Kitab al-Aqdas, and now we're on to the price of gold. How do you link those two concepts? I
think it's talking about how some punishments in the Kitab al-Aqdas are about the fines of gold.
Oh, I see. Well, first of all, the laws of the Kitab al-Aqdas that talk about fines and what they will be, those are drawn entirely from the Persian Bayan. And Baha'u'llah actually talks about that in the Kitab al-Aqdas. He says, because my predecessor revealed so many laws, I don't have to. Right? I can simply take some of his laws and put them into my scripture. Because they really were twins. The Guardian calls them twin manifestations. They were like fraternal twins. So consider this. You have laws about fines, and they're using a measurement system that's only used in Iran in the 19th century. We can figure out what it means now, but it's not used now. Not the same measurement system. And it's certainly not used globally. So in other words, the metric system that's now used in most countries of the world has nothing to do with the measurement system that's talked about in the Kitab al-Aqdas. So Sorry about that. So what's going to happen when there's any change that's necessary? Okay, any change that is necessary to Baha'i law, Baha'u'llah made it very clear. It's the House of Justice that's responsible for making supplementary legislation. So I think it's pretty clear that, well, first of all, the Baha'i world has not adopted this measurement system in the Kitabi Akdas because we live in different countries. It doesn't make sense. You know, it's like, you know, for right now, the dollar is the standard globally, but in the future, it might be something else. So it's okay. We have to do that. And when you're in Russia, you're using rubles. You can't pay with francs. You can't pay with Deutschmarks. You can't pay with dollars. So, those laws cannot be literally enforced all around the world because of the fact that we live in different societies and we have different modes of measurement. However, the principle can be employed. The principle is, first of all, the principle is that instead of 50 lashes or going to prison or having your hand cut off or your head cut off, we're giving you a fine. Now, that's got to be mind-blowing. You really think about that. The manifestation of God has said, you have reached a maturity point where we don't have to treat you like wild creatures. You know, we're not going to have to be harsh with you because you're going to understand the right way to do things. And most of the time, you're going to be self-governing. You're not even going to do things like that. You won't even think of doing things like that. So there are some beautiful passages which are described by Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha about the future in which there will be laws, but it won't be necessary to enforce laws because people won't break them. They will choose not to break them. They will choose to live in harmony with the law because they will see its wisdom. Well, that's a kind of description of what it is to be a mature human being. Mature human beings are not reckless and irresponsible. And they think about other people. And they think about their future. And so they do things the right way. And I'd be happy to include in my, when I send my notes for this talk, I can include the passages that I recently read and put together that talk about the state of the world in the future when we're all happy to follow the laws of God. And so all of those things like measurements, like how much of a fine am I going to have to pay? Well, you don't have to pay a fine because you're not breaking the law. So, it's like the fine is only a symbol, but it's a symbol of the change that happened. And the change that happened is that the laws of God are much less stringent than they used to be. It used to be that if you committed adultery, you're stoned to death. That's in the Torah. That's in the Bible. And then what do you have Baha'u'llah saying? He says, year of patience. Try to get it together, guys. They aren't just supposed to last. So you spend a year apart and you try to make it work. That's a really different thing, and that is including, it doesn't matter whether somebody committed adultery. You're still trying to make your marriage work because that's the priority. This is a different way of looking things, but it's different because we're mature. We are presumed to be mature. Of course, if we act individually in an immature fashion, then we've got a longer way to go. But the standard is now, you're a grown-up, right? So act like a grown-up because that's what's expected of you. And a grown-up, I'm not going to you know, I'm not going to be harsh with the grown-up because the grown-up can understand. I thought somebody was going to ask me about capital punishment or something, you know, but no, they just, you know, that's a hard one to explain to people because we have such emotional responses to capital punishment. But, you know, sure, gold standard, I wouldn't worry about that. You know, gold is always going to fluctuate in value based on how much of the material is in existence. By the way, this is a little funny anecdote for you. I live up in the Sierra Nevada of California. And the Sierra Nevada is where gold was found in 1849, which resulted in 1 million people going from the East Coast all the way here to find gold and become rich. That's California. That's how we got started.
Thank you. There's a few questions about just access to the sources, but you're going to send us the bibliography and then it'll be in the description of our YouTube video of this talk.
Yeah, and do you have a website? Do you have a place where people can go to, you know, to download documents?
We don't have a website like that, but they can download it from the description of the video when it's posted.
Okay. Another thing you can do, and believe me, I'd totally be delighted if people were to do this, is send me an email. Send me an email and say, please send me a copy of such and such, or it doesn't matter what you say. I'll simply send you a copy as soon as it's ready. My email is, I can put it in the chat, but I can also give it to you orally so that you can do that. And by the way, you know, some people say, you know, send me an email and then you'll write them and they won't reply. I'm not one of those people. I don't. I answer emails all day long. And I consider it my responsibility to follow up when I've promised materials to people because I spent years finding these things. So I don't want you to have to spend years looking for them. Okay, I'm going to put it in the chat right now.
Yes, and for those listening, it's peterry19@gmail.com. Okay, well, I think that's all the questions we have, but I'm definitely going to be one of those looking for the bibliography to do my own research because this is a very interesting topic that I've thought a lot about and been curious about. So thank you so much for putting this together.
Very welcome. And you know, if you have a chance with your Baha'i friends, you know, even if you find that you know, you don't have the time to investigate this yourself at this moment because you're working on your third Ph.D. or your third job or your third child or whatever it is that is taking up your time. And I sympathize with all of you, okay? Because I have 2 children and I have a full-time job, and somehow I find time to do this other thing. Is even if you don't have time, tell other people about it because it's a revelation. It's something really new that most Baha'is don't know about, and there's a lot of material on it. And you know, it's really, I have to say, it's just plain fun to learn something about your faith that you didn't know existed.
Yes, I agree completely. Okay, so our speaker next week is going to be actually a group of people, the Future Trends Africa Manifesto Delegation Team, and their topic is the surprise rise of Africa. And again, these talks occur every Saturday at noon Eastern time, so you can invite your friends and family. And again, if you're new to the Baha'i Faith or you'd like to be on our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I will put in the chat now. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you all next week. Have a good week. Bye.